One of the best ways to explain the concepts of governance, risk, and compliance is to discuss a real world scenario and tie these concepts to what actually happens in the real life. And that's exactly what we're going to do. So, to explain this, I've picked the example of a coffee shop. We're going to see how running a coffee shop securely maps perfectly to governance, risk, and compliance of any organization. So, we're going to start with the governance. So, as with any business, a coffee shop also has a set of rules that the owner has created. And these rules could be, for example, what time the store is going to open, what are the responsibilities of employees, like for example, what is the barista supposed to do, what is the cleaner supposed to do, and those kind of things. And then, what are the rules with regards to opening or closing the register? And for example, what is the data policy for handling customer loyalty cards? Like for example, employees need to be careful. They shouldn't share this information anywhere else apart from entering in the register or the online system of the coffee shop. So all of these are rules. And this is what governance is all about. So what is governance? So governance happens at the executive level. The owner who basically decides the strategy for running the business securely and responsibly. So for example, if you look at this rule, data handling policy for customer loyalty cards. So for example, in order to protect customers' data, the owner may come up with certain strategies or rules. So the strategy is at a higher level. It basically says, how are we going to run our business securely and responsibly? But then to implement this strategy, you need some sort of rules, okay? The owner may set up rules like, for example, if we want to secure the data for our customers, we don't want their customer loyalty information to be leaked. For example, it may include their names, addresses, phone numbers, those kind of things. So, for example, it could be lock registers after hours. And this would ensure that all of the data stored in the system is not accessible to anyone after hours, okay? Another rule could be that we are going to encrypt the Wi-Fi connection, so that any hacker or anyone trying to listen into the communication between the point of sale system or the register and the remote online system, they cannot eavesdrop on it. Another important one could be store customers' credit card data on third-party payment systems only. So if you don't have that information locally, then it just makes it more secure. Okay, the more information you store locally or on your online servers, the more you open up your business for possible risks and security breaches. And a very smart way to avoid these kind of issues, especially with regards to credit cards, which for example, or debit cards, which could be important for a coffee shop because people use those to pay, is to simply not store them at all. And you must have observed it also online. So when you go to shopping in a lot of websites, when you go to the checkout, they may reroute you to a gateway processor or a web page of Stripe or PayPal. So in that case, all of your communication, the communication between the customer and PayPal or Stripe is protected, and this company has nothing to do with it. After the payment has been accepted or declined, PayPal or Stripe, they send this notification to the customer. So that's how you can basically avoid saving a lot of data locally or on your own systems and just outsource that storing part to third party. So to sum it up, governance is equal to strategy. So basically, what is your long-term strategy? We want to run our business securely and responsibly. And what are the rules? These are the rules that are going to help us implement that strategy. You can think of governance as being running the business from the top. You're not in a reactive mode and just responding to threats. You're basically setting the overall direction. You're steering the ship towards that direction. You have to decide what's important, what do you want to protect, and how would you protect that. So basically, not only you have to come up with the strategy, what do you want, the long-term sort of like approach, but also the rules to implement that. So just like a coffee shop, in every organization, you once again need to have sort of like a strategy and then rules to implement that strategy. And that's what governance is all about. Now, similarly, all of these other rules that we had previously defined, they are also important. Let's say the timings are 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. So these are not just about convenience. It also sets boundaries for operations and reduces the security risk. So for example, at late night, you may have an heightened increase of theft, or the staff may get tired and start making mistakes or provide a poor quality of service. Similarly, the responsibilities of employees is also another rule which is going to help us achieve the strategy of operating our business securely. How? So, for example, the owner may define who is going to manage the register, who is going to handle the refunds, who keeps the keys. So, this basically also helps us enforce the strategy of securely operating our business. Similarly, for defining the process or the rule for opening and closing register, just to give you an example, the owner may define a rule that at least 2 employees must be present when opening the register, and then they may do the initial count of the cash there. And similarly, when finally closing a register, 2 employees need to be there and they need to basically note down what's the cash remaining in the register, those kind of things. So this is once again going to improve the strategy of securely operating the business. Similarly, the data handling for customer loyalty cards, we already discussed that. That also basically helps us implement the strategy that we want to operate our business securely. So once again, governance is equal to strategy, what do you want, and the rules on how are you going to achieve that. For any strategy, you have to basically define a set of rules which are going to help you achieve that. Let's move to the second part of GRC, which is the risk. So R for risk. Now, what is risk? So risk is basically anything that can go wrong. So in the case of coffee shop, what are the possible risks? So one risk which the owner needs to worry about is credit card fraud. So for example, someone may skim a customer's card at the payment terminal. It's a clear reputational and financial risk. Similarly, another thing that the owner might be worried about is if someone is going to hack the Wi-Fi network and they may start eavesdropping on any communication happening between, let's say, the register and the remote online system or the payment servers. And this could risk exposing customer data or sensitive financial information. So another risk could be a barista could accidentally delete customer loyalty data. As you know, these sort of businesses run a lot on person-to-person marketing. So let's say they had this long list of customers and their emails, and they often sent out promotions or those kind of things. And if all of that data is lost, and also all of the points that customers have accumulated, so all of that would be lost, which could cause reputational damage to the business. So all of these are different types of risks. So risk is anything that can go wrong. But the key point is the impact or the likelihood of a risk, which we are going to discuss next. But at this point, I just want you to understand that risk is basically anything that can go wrong. So formally, you can define risk as being equal to what can go wrong plus what impact it may have. Now we're going to discuss risk in a lot of more detail in the next lectures because there's another element as well in play. So it's not just about what can go wrong and what impact could it have, it's also the likelihood of that risk occurring. Okay, we're going to discuss that later on. But just understand for this lecture that risk is basically anything that can go wrong. So when you're creating your GRC strategy, you need to be sure to identify things that could go wrong and the potential impacts they could have. So just as a coffee shop, a business would also need to evaluate these factors. They would need to come up with a risk management strategy, identify the risks, identify the possible impacts, possibly the likelihood, and then come up with a strategy to minimize those risks. Okay, the last piece of the puzzle is compliance. Compliance essentially means following external rules and standards, laws, regulations, or policies set by others. So previously we discussed the rules set by the organization itself, the coffee shop for example, but now we're talking about external rules. So what could be the type of rules? It could be, for example, a food inspector may periodically check if the food, including the coffee, served is hygienic, it's well maintained, and are the staff following safety procedures. Similarly, you could have data privacy regulations as well, since you are dealing with customers' personal information like their names, maybe phone numbers, email addresses, those kind of things. So you may need to follow certain rules or frameworks like GDPR, which basically relates to how personal information is stored, the right of the customers to that information should be accurate, the customer should have the right to be forgotten if they ask you to delete the data, so those kind of things. And more importantly, have you taken appropriate steps, done the due diligence, and put security measures in place to ensure that this data doesn't get leaked? So to sum it up, just like a cafe needs hygiene, data, and operational rules, organizations also need cybersecurity GRC or Governance, Risk and Compliance, to protect the data, manage risk, and meet regulations like GDPR or others.